Welcome back to our podcast, Regulation Matters, a Clear Conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Line Dempsey. I'm currently the Chief Compliance Officer with Riccobeni Associates Family Dentistry, with locations in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I've also been a board member and past president of CLEAR. As many of you are aware, the Council on Licensure Enforcement and Regulation, or CLEAR, is an association of individuals, agencies, and organizations that comprise the international community of professional and occupational regulation. This podcast is a chance for you to hear about important topics in our regulatory community. Our August episode is always reserved for a focus on the upcoming annual education conference. This year's conference will be in Chicago, Illinois, and today's podcast episode will highlight an initiative from a CLEAR member organization in Illinois, as well as a preview of the conference keynote presentation planned for Chicago next month. First, we're taking a look at a report and recommendations from the Comprehensive Licensing Information to Minimize Barriers, or CLIMB, Task Force in Illinois. Joining me is Camile Lindsay, Director of the Division of Professional Regulation within the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. We're glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, can you start by giving our listeners maybe an overview of the CLIMB Task Force and what prompted its formation?
Sure. So the CLIMB Task Force was prompted by Representative Carol Ammons and the Institute for Justice with the goal of reviewing whether professional regulations would address some of the unnecessary barriers to licensure, particularly as they relate to low and middle income occupations. It was comprised of members of the General Assembly, IDFPR, as well as individuals and experts involved with the justice-involved community. And then there were some members from the workforce development areas and small businesses.
Excellent. Well, I think the report highlights systemic barriers to licensure and employment for underrepresented communities. Could you maybe share some of the key findings that stood out to you with regard to that?
Sure. So the first was something that is really a personal passion of mine. I have a background working for the Department of Corrections, and I'm a former prosecutor. And so that issue was returning citizens and wanting to ensure that they are able to get licensed and find employment in spite of criminal backgrounds. And so that was something that we were already working on. And then the second one is something that we are currently working with other stakeholders to address in the General Assembly, and that is with regard to hair braiders. Hair braiding is a licensed profession here in Illinois, but we are looking at deregulating hair braiding. And thanks to the CLIMB Task Force, there is pending legislation that will repeal that requirement.
So why was it important for the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation to kind of take a leadership role in addressing these barriers?
Well, IDFPR is the foremost regulatory body in Illinois, so not having us in a leadership role there would not serve anyone. But let me take a step back. Our agency's mission is to ensure that all qualified professionals are able to receive licensure that they have worked and trained for. Just the same, we have to ensure that our standards for licensure are appropriately set to keep the public safe. That's why we don't use the phrase reducing barriers. We think that it misses the mark. What we should be saying is that we are reducing unnecessary barriers to licensure, and the task of doing that is ongoing.
Now, in keeping with the task force mission statement that you just eloquently spoke about, the report outlines several recommendations to, I guess, reduce or eliminate unnecessary impediments to employment and entrepreneurship. So what recommendations do you see as, I guess, would be considered maybe the most critical for immediate action that you would address right now?
Sure. Supporting returning citizens and hair braiders.
Excellent. Now, how does, and if I'm going to get this acronym correct, IDFPR plan to implement these recommendations? I guess what challenges are you guys anticipating that you're going to run into?
So the simpler one is hair braiders, right? There's, as I mentioned, legislation in front of the General Assembly. The issue of supporting returning citizens is a lot more complicated, and it goes beyond just our agency. We could devote an entire discussion on this issue by itself, but in the interest of time, I'll just say that a key component to our success is getting training and licensing started before individuals are released from penal institutions.
So one of the report themes is the need for greater transparency in licensing requirements. That's something we're seeing across, all kinds of different regulatory fields and states. But what steps is IDFPR taking to make pathways to licensure clearer, maybe even more accessible?
So we're creating greater transparency in licensing requirements, and it's something that we've been working on prior to the task force issuing its report. Our biggest effort on that front is updating our license processing system. Our current system is from the late 1990s, and we are currently in the process of bringing a new state-of-the-art system, core, and getting that up and running. We currently have 7 license types that are available in the core system, and many more are expected later this year. And that system will address many of the challenges that applicants or existing licensees have reported when attempting to get their licenses or renew their licenses.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that you're moving forward with something like that. Now, another major focus is workforce development and reducing unnecessary regulatory barriers. So could you maybe discuss any specific policy changes or initiatives that you have already been implemented or maybe are in the works?
To echo what I said earlier, we want and need licensing standards. We need to know that the doctor operating on us or the architect building a building knows what they're doing. Our task is ensuring that standards are appropriately set, regardless of the profession, and that's a constant and ongoing effort. A critical part of that is working with our partners within the professions and getting feedback from them on what's working and what is not working.
So outside of the CLIMB task force, what steps is the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, or IDFPR, what are they taking to reduce barriers to licensure?
So particularly when you talk about the reentry community, even before the CLIMB task force report came out, we were looking at ways to reduce barriers. So one of the things that we've done within the last 12 to 18 months was that we started a criminal justice reentry group that is comprised of people who have been formerly incarcerated. And they meet with myself and other members of our staff to talk about what barriers they are experiencing and what recommendations they have that will help to reduce barriers. We also revamped our intent to deny process so that 90% of the people who would have previously received intent to deny letters no longer receive them. We had received feedback that those letters were scary and that as a result of that, a lot of people never responded to them, which also led to them never getting a license. We've been working with the Department of Corrections. We've put on at least one meeting with a number of folks incarcerated in DOC to explain licensure processes. We've explained that felonies are not an automatic bar to licensure for most professions. We've also outlined what they need to do to become licensed cosmetologists and barbers. And we've in fact been issuing licenses to people who are incarcerated so that the day they get out, they're able to start working in their field. So, and then we're still exploring ways to get funding for applicants who are incarcerated to take the exams and pay for their application fees.
Wow, that's a lot. That's great. So, what are the next steps for IDFPR and the CLIMB initiative? How can regulators, policymakers, and the public stay engaged with this work?
So To be honest, the task force is done. They were mandated to write a report, and they have produced the report. As I mentioned previously, they came up with some recommendations, one of which is moving its way through the General Assembly right now. When it comes to recommendations and relationships that we've built through this process with Chair Ammons and Senator Belt, the work there has just begun. We will continue to work together with them to address the concerns that were mentioned in the report.
So, having been through this now, I guess what advice would you offer for other regulators in different jurisdictions that are considering, similar initiatives to this, based on your experience with this task force?
The advice I would give would be to be open, engaged, and collaborative with others. We may not see eye to eye on everything, but the goal is still the same, and that is to ensure that qualified professionals are able to get the license that they have worked for, and that those who abuse or misuse their license are held accountable.
Excellent. Well, where can our listeners go to learn more about the report and then your ongoing efforts that you guys have done?
Sure, you can visit our website, idfpr.illinois.gov. Second, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Blue Sky. We have a great communications team that is constantly posting updates about what's going on at IDFPR.
Well, excellent. Well, it's been great to hear about the work of the task force and its recommendations. So thank you, Camille, for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's certainly been a pleasure.
Next, we'd like to talk with the keynote presenter that will be with us in Chicago. Jeff Korzenik is an author and chief economist, and he'll be presenting in Chicago on international lessons on labor participation. Thanks for taking some time with me today.
Thanks so much. I'm pleased to be here. I'm really looking forward to meeting your members in Chicago in September.
Well, we're super glad to have you today and looking forward to the conference as well. So to start, can you give us a little information maybe about your specific journey, from, a traditional investment analysis to exploring the social issues that shape workplace participation?
Sure. At the time I started looking at labor force participation rates very closely, I was chief investment strategist helping manage over what ultimately became about $50 billion in investment assets. But there was a problem in the economy about 10, 15 years ago that economists were starting to talk about, which was the falling labor force participation rates in the United States. So fewer and fewer a smaller and smaller percentage of our adult population was actually in the labor force. And economists knew that some of it was related to the aging of the population, but some of it was, to them, unexplainable. And that bothered me. I don't like the unexplainable, and just putting a new number into financial models wasn't very satisfying. At the time, I was doing a lot of what we called CEO roundtables, go to different cities, meet with groups of CEOs for a guided discussion about the economy. And I started to hear consistent labor force problems. And through my research and through the research of others that I was able to integrate into my own work, by about 2014, I had identified the problem. And the problem was that we had social ills interfering with labor force participation rates in ways we had never seen before in our country. And the three were long-term unemployment, the opioid epidemic, and having a criminal record. And of course, they're related. Long-term unemployment leads to despair, self-medication with opioids, and addiction leads to criminal records. And once you see the way that social ills can become macroeconomic issues, you can't unsee that. And that started a more than decade-long investigation into the interplay with social issues like fertility rates and our labor force issues.
Great. So I think, as I understand it, you've described people and productivity as the the twin pillars of economic growth. Am I saying that right? Yeah.
Yes,
So
twin pillars of economic growth, absolutely.
how is that framed helping you see workforce issues like, long-term unemployment, addiction,
Sure.
or involvement with, like, the justice system in a different light, if you would?
Economists have always understood that labor force growth, workforce growth was a key component of growth, but they tend to think of productivity issues solely as the result of investment in equipment or technology, software. It's really also an issue of investment in your workforce and giving your workforce economic mobility, the ability to move from low-paying jobs to high-paying jobs. And that's a different framing, and it's really informed my work, and I think is very relevant to the CLEAR audience too, because some of the barriers that are created, and some with good justification, but some of those barriers that are created in terms of economic mobility and the ability to increase the productivity of a worker have to do with regulations and licensure.
Well, thank you for that. Well, from your research, I guess, what are some of the core challenges around labor participation that you see in the U.S. today? And I guess, how are those trends comparing to other countries?
Yeah, I think, the damage done by long-term unemployment. So the three that I identified more than a decade ago: long-term unemployment, the opioid epidemic, and criminal justice involvement. You have to look at them separately and then talk about other issues that have developed. Long-term unemployment came about because of the gutting of industrial America in the first decade of this century. People who were trained in factory jobs not only had nowhere to go to contribute to the economy, but they found that those local economies lost their factories, lost their economic vibrancy, so there was just no jobs. That kind of damage led to a lot of dropout of the people dropping out of the labor force. I think that damage is behind us. I'm a little concerned today with rising levels of long-term unemployment. Companies, even though the unemployment rate is very low, companies have been dealing with economic uncertainty by cutting their hiring way back. They're not doing layoffs, but they're not hiring either. So there might be some risk there, but largely the long-term unemployment issue is behind us. The opioid issue continues to be a problem, and it's going to become, in some ways, although we're mercifully seeing opioid-related deaths are declining, and addiction levels are declining, and usage levels are declining. That's all good news, but the numbers are still really awful. And if you look at some of the economic goals, say, of the current administration to bring back more factory jobs, those are jobs that require drug testing for workplace safety. So the use of drugs, whether even legal drugs, the legalization of marijuana causes a challenge because you still need to test for drugs for many, many industrial jobs. And then the final one, criminal justice involvement, continues to be a problem. We have over 19 million Americans have a felony conviction. I will say this is getting better. More and more employers are open to hiring people with criminal records. But we have a long way to go, both in broadening the base of employers, but also in terms of looking at giving economic mobility. People will get hired with a criminal record with a really low-level job and not have the opportunity to move into higher-level jobs. And then I'm focused on two other areas in the United States now. One, I do believe we can do better in female labor force participation rates. They trail male labor force participation rates. A lot of that is cultural, and that's fine for people who choose not to enter the labor force. But we can look at, and this is kind of the cutting edge research that I'm looking forward to sharing with the CLEAR audience in September. You start looking at other countries, like Iceland has a female labor force participation rate for 25 to 54-year-olds that is about 87%. In the US, it's 78%. That tells us that even though we are doing well, we've improved enormously from, say, the early 70s, maybe we can do better. The big area where I see the US failing these days, and we can learn a lot from other countries, is older workers. In the US, when you hit your 50s, if you lose your job, your opportunity to re-enter the workforce at any kind of comparable level is really diminished. And there's been very consistent studies that shows that age bias is alive and well in the United States, and we can learn from others. And licensing does play a role in all of these issues as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I know your keynote it's going to highlight some international lessons, right? And to give just a kind of a preview here, can you share maybe a couple of global examples where policy or regulatory frameworks have kind of improved workforce participation, and what the U.S. might learn from them? You kind of touched on that a little bit just then, but I think a little bit deeper.
Sure. Let me flesh that out a little bit. I think Japan is a great example. The problem, and I'll lay this out with the audience, the problem that all these countries have is declining fertility rates, declining birth rates. And so we have workers who are retiring, but are still consumers. So who's left? If they've retired, who's left when you've had decades of declining birth rates? And one of the biggest challenges, or the earliest challenges, was faced by Japan. A few years ago, I partnered with Daisuke Nakajima, a Japan economist. We had a piece in the Wall Street Journal talking about how Japan addressed this challenge, and largely through policy. So Japan had two areas of major opportunity. One, they trailed most of the developed world in female labor force participation rates. So they set up tax incentives for women. They required companies to provide plans for how they were going to deal with the coming labor force shortage. They had to produce those plans publicly and file essentially a strategy that focused attention. Now, Japan not only caught up with Europe's female labor force participation rates, the Eurozone, they caught up with the US as well, and have now, among certain age groups, are actually exceeding US female labor force participation rates. So a tremendous come from behind story. Japan famously also does a really good job with older workers. And they do that through a policy framework that's set up what we would think of as workforce boards, would be kind of the analogy in the US, federally mandated workforce centers to help people build up their skills and get reemployed. In our country, they focus mostly on workers with very low levels of experience, low levels of educational attainment. In Japan, they focus on older workers who want to re-enter the workforce. And at any given time, they're called Silver Jinsai centers. In any given time in Japan, you have more than 700,000 workers signed up, registered, so employers know where to find older workers who are eager to work as well. And they have something like an 80% placement rate. So big victory. It's allowed Japan, even though their population was shrinking, it's allowed Japan to grow their workforce over the same time period by millions. So big victory. Those are the things, the kind of policies that we can look at: tax incentives, structures for reemployment, and then, of course, licensure issues play into this as well.
You bring up licensure issues. I think that's a great kind of a segue to my next question, which is where do you see regulation and licensing either helping or hindering, labor participation, especially when it comes to, underutilized talent pools like individuals with criminal records, which you touched on a moment ago, or those experience maybe long-term unemployment, like they've not been able to find that job.
I'm going to give you experience from my own licensing background. As an investment professional, I was FINRA licensed. And for many years, if you left or were laid off, you had a 2-year window in which you could keep up your continuing education requirement, and then automatically get your license back if you were reemployed. And the reality was, for many professionals, particularly after 2008-09, which was a deep recession and really kind of decimated employment in the investment management industry, 2 years wasn't enough. And so FINRA, the licensing authority, extended that period to 5 years. And, that's the kind of really helpful reform. But you think about not just FINRA, but any licensing, if you lose your employment, how long a window do you have to get back? And when you extend that window from a relatively short period to longer period, you can accommodate, say, parents who drop out of the workforce to take care of children for a number of years, or take care of an older, perhaps dying relative. That's very commonplace, and it just takes time. So extending those periods of grace is very important. For people with criminal records, it's a matter of really two things. One, not being unnecessarily excluding of people with criminal records. So, for instance, many states, it's a declining number, fortunately, but many states had barbering license requirements that if you had a felony conviction, you couldn't be a barber. Well, if someone, were Sweeney Todd, right, committing murder in a barbershop, that's one thing. But for the vast number of felony convictions, and probably all of them, it's not really relevant. And so you see a number of states have dropped those kind of requirements. The other thing and this is not to say there shouldn't be licensing requirements relevant. I don't want someone with multiple felony DWIs driving a school bus. I mean, there's some common sense issues here, but they shouldn't overdo them. The other thing that I think is important is to have appeal and workaround. So exemption processes that are in place. I know, for instance, the FDIC, the banking authority, has what are called Section 19 exemptions that they've broadened out. So if you had a crime, a financial fraud, you can't work for a financial institution. But if you had a relatively low-level drug conviction in your youth, you absolutely can. Those are the kind of things that work out. And appeals processes are also important when practical.
Well, kind of speaking on that, I think you've done some extensive work on second chance hiring,
Yes.
and even published a book on that topic. So, what have you seen successful employers do well, and I guess how could licensing boards or regulators, support that kind of innovation?
Sure. So second chance employment, just for your listeners to be clear, is the intentional, and I have to underscore, intentional seeking out people with criminal records as a talent pool. So it's not just giving someone a job, it's knowing what you're getting into and going about it with a plan. And what that usually means is that you have to hire in partnership with a nonprofit or some other third party that gets to know the candidate well enough to do a character assessment. So not everyone with a criminal record is ready to be a good employee, but many, many are, including those coming out of prison. Not all, but many. But how do you as an employer know who's ready? The best practices seem to revolve around partnering with, say, what are called reentry nonprofits, sometimes parole and probation officers, who can basically say, I've gotten to know this person is ready and determined to rebuild their life. And then the other factor is understanding where people are in their lives and what gaps they may have. Just as with any employee, you as an employer want to maximize the productivity of your employee by addressing any gaps they might have. And it's kind of familiar territory if you're talking about people whose gaps are maybe needing more experience with a software platform or something similar. It's a little less familiar when you're dealing with people who have lacked mentorship and examples their whole lives, who frankly might need to be told you have to show up on time every day, not just occasionally, but every day, or have to be told that if your car breaks down, you should call in. They simply don't know. They're eager to learn. And then it's not solving the issues that they face, usually associated with extreme poverty, but maybe having access, helping them navigate to tools. So transportation and housing are big issues for people with criminal records. They may have requirements related to their community supervision, so parole or probation requirements. Employers need to at least ask about these and see if they can work with the employee. It sounds like a lot. It's actually probably not really much more than we do for employees, traditional employees. We do all sorts of accommodations. It's just doing accommodations that are targeted to people who are raised in deep poverty, without mentorship, without coaching, without examples. The benefits are that you often have nonprofits or government agencies that will effectively co-invest in these supports. Everything from the work opportunity tax credit available for a period of time for people, say, coming out of prison, as well as others, to nonprofits that will help provide transportation for your employee. So you have co-investors in this investment in your workforce. The other thing that the data show is that when you hire people who are eager to prove they are worth more than their worst mistake, that is, they want to be defined by something other than their criminal record, they become incredibly engaged and loyal employees. And that translates to both productivity and profitability for employers.
Oh, that's great. Well, as we look ahead to your keynote at the CLEAR conference, the annual education conference, what do you hope our CLEAR attendees working in professional occupational regulation will take away from your presentation?
Sure. The first thing is that this labor shortage is a global labor shortage, and that it is not one of those COVID things that kind of resolved itself. Our belief is it's actually going to start to get worse again, particularly in the United States. And the U.S. is not even the worst off of all countries, though we're more challenged than average. So the labor shortage is coming back, and it's going to be here to stay for at least the next decade, and that it is global. Number two, that there are populations, well, part of the solutions are populations we have overlooked or underutilized. And number three, that licensure and regulation can play a role in being able to access those talent pools.
That's excellent. Well, I really do appreciate you giving us some of your the background and a sneak peek of the conference keynote. I'm super looking forward to it. I'm sure our listeners are looking forward to your presentation in September. So thank you for speaking with me today.
It's my pleasure. Can't wait to see everyone in September.
Absolutely. And it has been a pleasure. And for our listeners, there's still time to register for the CLEAR Annual Education Conference to hear more from Jeff, as well as the numerous sessions and networking opportunities on offer. Please go to www.clearhq.org/AEC for all the conference details and register to join us either virtually or in Chicago, Illinois next month. But before we meet in Chicago, there's plenty of opportunity for online discussion. I invite CLEAR members to head to the CLEAR Regulatory Network to connect with regulatory colleagues worldwide. This podcast episode will be posted there, and we'd love your feedback. What are you most looking forward to at the upcoming conference? And what topics or burning questions do you hope will be answered in the keynote and the sessions? We greatly appreciate and thank our members for our discussion and feedback in this CLEAR Regulatory Network. And if you haven't already, we invite and encourage you to join and take a part in these online discussions. I also want to thank our listeners for tuning in for this episode. We'll be back with another episode of Regulation Matters, a CLEAR conversation very soon. And if you're new to the CLEAR podcast, please subscribe to us. We can be found on Podbean or any of your favorite podcast services. And if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, please leave a rating or comment in the app. Those reviews help us to improve our ranking and make it easier for new listeners to find us. Feel free also to visit our website at www.clearhq.org for additional resources and a calendar of upcoming programs and events. Finally, I'd like to thank our CLEAR staff, specifically Stephanie Thompson. She is our content coordinator and editor for this program. Once again, I'm Lyon Dempsey, and I hope to be speaking to you again very soon.